Hello. So in this video, in honor of Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about the greatest Thanksgiving movie of all time, which is Barry Sonnenfeld's Addams Family Values. The follow-up to his earlier film just called The Addams Family, which I did a video on in my October Halloween special. So Addams Family Values really picks up on a lot of the same kinds of themes that the Addams Family film does, particularly in the importance of family. But the dynamics here have changed somewhat. The stakes here even have changed somewhat. Basically, so there's actually a lot of dynamic components of family relationships here, but one of the plot lines revolves around Morticia having a new baby. And so Wednesday and Pugsley are jealous of the baby. They attempt to kill the baby in various ways. So that's a good portion of their storyline. In order to try and sort of resolve this situation, Gomez and Morticia decide that they're going to hire a nanny, which for the Addamses is a fairly difficult task because most nannies are not particularly prepared for the kind of lifestyle the Addamses lead. But they find one nanny who seems perfect. Her name is Debbie. She takes the macabre bizarreness of the Addamses in stride, and ingratiates herself with Gomez and Morticia, with Thing, with Lurch, and especially with Fester, because Fester actually falls in love with her. And this is one of the other sort of parallel storylines, is that Fester reveals that he's always been jealous of Gomez and Morticia's relationship. And so he pursues Debbie, not necessarily effectively, or not necessarily, he's not suave about it. Let's put it that way. But he ultimately is effective because she does agree to marry him. So Wednesday is the one who's really suspicious of Debbie. Pugsley doesn't trust her, but he's more of a supporting character to Wednesday. Wednesday really drives a lot of the action in Addams Family Values, actually. Christina Ricci, again, one of the great sort of early mid-90s goth girls was Christina Ricci's Wednesday Addams. She's suspicious of Debbie, particularly since she overhears Debbie sort of insulting the new baby. And so Debbie engineers to have Wednesday and Pugsley basically removed from the household. She tricks Gomez and Morticia into sending them to summer camp. Oh, and what a summer camp it is. Camp Chippewa, which... So first off, there's a lot of problematic racial stuff here. There's a lot of problematic elements of reduction and appropriation of indigenous North American cultures. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But this is an upbeat place where you do things like sing-alongs and swimming and arts and crafts and putting on plays, which is not the kind of stuff that the Addams kids or the Addamses in general do. So they are malcontents. to put it lightly. Debbie and Fester get married. Debbie forces Fester basically to abandon the family. And we come to learn, and actually we'd learned this earlier in the film, but it becomes increasingly relevant, that Debbie is a serial killer known as the Black Widow. So she marries rich men like Fester, who has a tremendous amount of money, and then she murders them and inherits their fortunes. This is her plan. This is why Fester's bizarre, awkward courtship of her works, is because she has determined to marry him from the beginning. So, she attempts to kill Fester. Not particularly successfully, because the Addamses are incredibly resilient. So she electrocutes him by dropping a radio into the bathtub that he is in. I think she hits him with her car. She puts a bomb in the house and blows him up. None of this scratches Fester. He just keeps on keeping on. And eventually, Fester realizes that she's attempting to kill him. She doesn't really love him. And so he returns to the Addams family mansion. Debbie pursues him, and she prepares to kill the entire family. She prepares to electrocute the entire family via electric chair, because they have, they have enough electric chairs to put everybody in one at the same time. And Debbie explains what it's all about. What has sort of driven her is this deep-seated sense of never having been loved enough. And this is partially bullshit. This stems from this really banal originary trauma. With it, her parents for Christmas got her Malibu Barbie rather than ballerina Barbie, and because of that difference, she becomes this serial killer who murders her parents and then murders successive husbands, etc., etc. The Addamses are actually capable of sort of empathizing with that, because of their own macabre life. They can sort of say, yeah, that all makes perfect sense. Sometimes you just gotta kill people. But the one member of the Addams family that Debbie neglects to put in an electric chair is the baby, who ends up through a sort of Rube Goldberg machine of cannonballs crashing into floorboards that fling him up through the skylight and back down and whatever kind of stuff. The baby then picks up 2 open power cords, sticks them together, and it ends up sending the shock back to Debbie, where she gets electrocuted instead of the Addamses. And so again, we've got these sort of recurring themes throughout the film of this desire for family, this desire for interpersonal connections, and the lengths that people will go to secure those things. Fester's need for Debbie's love. Fester's need for that romantic connection drives him even to abandon his family, which is the most important thing in the world to him. In order to protect Fester from Debbie, Wednesday and Pugsley basically burned down this summer camp, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. Debbie, in order to feel loved, murders tons of people. So, it's not positive necessarily, but it's perversely positive in the sense that, this is all about establishing connections and building interpersonal relationships. It's just really twisted and macabre in the way that it's done. So, how is this a Thanksgiving movie, I hear you cry? Well, it's a Thanksgiving movie in that at the camp, the male director, Gary, writes a Thanksgiving play as the sort of the culmination of the summer camp experience, where the snooty wasp blonde girl gets to play a pilgrim, and Wednesday and all the sort of weird kids of the camp get to play the indigenous peoples. So we've got African Americans, we've got Asians, we've got people with eyeglasses, we've got geeks, whatever it is, and the one person that Wednesday sort of actually connects with is allergic to basically everything. He's very Jewish. I'll say that. He's very sort of stereotypically Jewish. Eyeglasses, very skinny, allergic to everything, wants to stay inside and read rather than do any actual activities, things like this. He's very stereotypical. And his parents are very stereotypically Jewish as well. So, it's fun, I guess. Compound that, those racist Jewish stereotypes with some racist American Indian stereotypes, and go to town. But anyway, so what happens, Gary writes this play where the pilgrims, and this is a very sort of American, Euro-American, white person type approach to the Thanksgiving story, where the pilgrims are going to be sort of kind and benevolent and like, oh, welcome you savages, come share food with us, even though, you're filthy and disgusting and on the land that we're now stealing from you, which is all super problematic. The part that's written for Wednesday, an Indian princess, and the Indian princess thing is a huge problem in terms of stereotyped representations of indigenous North Americans. But Wednesday is cast as the Indian princess, whose job is basically to come and be like, oh, Sarah Miller, you're so beautiful, and we fucking suck because we're indigenous peoples. So again, super fucking problematic, Gary. And actually, it's a huge problem for the people who wrote the film as well, so I do blame them. But then Wednesday's like, actually, we're not going to eat with you. The gods of my tribe have sent me a vision that we're about to face hundreds of years of cultural and actual genocide, and so we're going to slaughter you and burn down your village. And also the parents in the audience. Fuck those guys too. So basically this group of camp misfits starts lighting stuff on fire. They tie the wasp chick playing Sarah Miller to a stake, with the implication that they light her on fire. They tie Gary and his wife, whose name escapes me right at the moment, but they tie them to a spit and they basically sort of rotate them, roasting them over an open fire. They burn down the camp buildings and things like this. So I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, it plays into stereotypes about barbarian savages and things like this that are incredibly problematic stereotypes and depictions of indigenous peoples. But at the same time, there is a kind of liberatory fantasy there. I mean, this camp has been a sort of symbol of repression for these children who don't conform to this chipper WASP identity. So there is a liberatory moment there, and in a way it mirrors this sort of liberatory possibility for indigenous acts of resurgence, indigenous acts of resistance to colonialism and to capitalist exploitation.